Archive 5 Isometric Projections of 2040 AD. It would be a miracle indeed if all these coincidences were purely accidental. Anyone familiar with the theory of probabilities knows that with every additional coincidence, the chances for another grow smaller. Immanuel Velikovsky. If we could view the history of the world from a geometrical position outside of its events, we would see from this unique vantage point waverings of events moving backwards and forward in time without impeding one another. The trillions of concentric rings, ever spanning outward, flow through one another effortlessly, and the interference subtly alters a conceptual present from an ancestral past. People are radically and spatially connected to their ancestors and their descendants. The events experienced now forging the future patterns just as the present has been constructed from a multitude of pasts. It is a seemingly infinite matrix of disconnected events that begin at many different times and converge in the here and now to build the present. We are essentially descendants of history, as historical events were themselves conceived from those that preceded them. If the present is forged out of patterns whose geometrical reflections turn space into solids out of fleeting present reality, then the phenomenon of time, which is merely the motion and change of position of physical objects, should be measured in patterns that reflect this truth. Immersed in this material existence, which is governed by the motion of its own dimensions, we cannot help but instinctively know that all space and time is measured, and that by our own perception of past and present events, we can know the future. By studying present and past events, we can fathom a future. This is the study of calendrical isometrics. Isometric projections can be a method by which to 1. Determine the beginning or end of a specific timeline. 2. Demonstrate that prediction and prophecy can have a scientific explanation. 3. Observe retrospectively that events, phenomena, are fixed in the collective, although individually we have the power to determine our own position, relation to the events. The third is a challenging statement, and since men began to ponder these mysteries, there have been many among the learned who have been offended at this concept. This does not refer to free will or the choices we make, only to events in a broader foundational sense. That the future is predetermined is easily discovered when regarding an accurate past, especially when reviewing the patterns of cataclysmic astronomical cycles. But predestination only applies to the geometry of our spatial conditions, which form the parameters of our existence. For example, we have great latitude in deciding for ourselves who we want to be, who we are, what we do, what we want to do, where we go, and where we want to go, and when we want these things within this space-time structure. We are not puppets, but images of something else, and we flow through events, traveling through the fixed geometry of what we call reality, ever deciding for ourselves the conditions which we subject ourselves to. Free will defines us as travelers within a fixed and unchangeable geometry. We are the reason the geometry exists, and our destiny is to exit this time structure so we can enter the next. Where that is located depends on one's trajectory within the present construction and is a matter between each of the created and the Creator. And because human institutions and civilizations had a beginning point within the fixed dimensions of history, they were given a definite end. Our duty, responsibility, and goal is to see beyond the structures that presently confine us, so we can more accurately see where we are going. The pool is not a sea of endless water. It has boundaries. Ripples in the pond of time traverse one another until they make contact with these immovable boundaries. The waves slightly change form and reflect back, flowing through other ripples, and the interference patterns result with slight modification of the events, but do not alter them into something else. For example, In a hologram, a lizard is a lizard and nothing else, albeit there may be 10,000 variations within the species. In this pool, the tadpole and minnow swim through the infinite pattern of events unknowingly. Breaking the surface, poking their head out into the open air, they sometimes create interference patterns of their own, but the parameters of the pool can never change by any conscious or unconscious acts of the tadpole or minnow. The boundaries are fixed. We defer to the erudition of Professor Soddy, who in 1911 said, "Civilization as it is at present, even on a purely physical side, is not a continuous self-supporting movement. The conditions under which it originates determine its period and fix the date of its decline." Our first glimpse of calendrical isometrics concerned the World Trade Center destruction in New York. Now, we will peer deeper into the history of the world in our search of what to expect in 2040. The first example is evidently the simplest because it involves the astronomical period of Phoenix. In 1902, Phoenix blanketed the Earth in dust and mud, sometimes as much as 50 tons per square mile. A volcano named Mount Pelée exploded on the French Caribbean island of Martinique, incinerating 30,000 people in an instant in May, and another volcano in Santa Maria, Guatemala, killed 1,000 people. In the United States, in 1902, the U.S. Census Bureau was founded. Washington, D.C. was planned out, with the capital reworked to employ geometrical arrangements through its streets and districts. In New York City, the first skyscraper was built, the Fuller Building. This particular year, 1902, is an isometric epicenter, being 138 years after 1764 AD, when Phoenix was visibly seen to pass over one-fifth of the sun's surface by the naked eye and by a European astronomer through a telescope. Counting this same 138 years after 1902 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, planet Phoenix will be visibly seen. Earth will be bathed in cosmic dust, clouding up the atmosphere in May. Volcanic activity will result in high fatalities in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Architecture of New York and Washington, D.C. will come to an end with loss of American population, or census. In 1980, on May 18th through 19th, the long-dormant volcano, Mount St. Helens, exploded, causing widespread environmental ruin in the western United States. This massive explosion resulted with few fatalities because of the mountain's rural location. Also, in 1980, an earthquake in southern Italy killed 3,000 people, and amazingly, at Peekskill, New York, a red Chevrolet Malibu was struck by a meteorite the size of a football that penetrated the entire vehicle, passed through the gas tank, and impacted the concrete, forming a crater 6 inches deep. This was 60.5 years after 1919, when Mount Khulud in Indonesia erupted, killing 5,000 people in May. Counting 60.5 years after 1980 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, volcanic activity in the western United States and in the Far East, both bordering the Pacific, will result in wide-scale ecological ruin. Southern Europe will experience seismic activity in May. Both the volcanoes and quakes will have high death tolls. In 1965, a comet is seen. A windstorm afflicts Bangladesh, India, killing 17,000 people in May, followed by a second windstorm that killed 30,000 and a third in December that killed 10,000 more. In the northeastern United States, the Great Blackout occurred, darkening New York and surrounding regions. Power companies not even connected to the main power grid went offline, and VLF frequency and ham radio reception were jammed with static, all indicating not a power outage, but a powerful electromagnetic disturbance. This was 75 years after 1890, when hail with sandstone pebbles rained from the skies of France in June, and previously in May, a substance like blood rained upon Messagne, Calabria. It was sent to Rome for analysis, and to everyone's amazement, it was discovered to be real blood. In October of the same year, people looked up to see a comet-like object pass across 100 degrees of the sky at an incredible velocity in 45 minutes from Grahamstown. Counting 75 years after 1965 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. India suffers a massive loss of population due to repeated storms in 2040. These are connected to electromagnetic interference and stress between a celestial body approaching Earth. Recall that Nostradamus in his 2040 AD quatrains mentioned back-to-back storms. New York will lose electricity, as will most of the northeastern seaboard. Telecommunications will be ineffective, and hail, sand, and rocks will rain from the skies, and blood will rain on Earth in May. Nostradamus too refers to blood from the skies. This indicates that frozen landscapes fragmenting off a shattered planet will enter the atmosphere containing the organic remains of ancient life forms that lived long ago, before their world was destroyed and frozen. People will behold one or more gigantic objects passing close to the Earth. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty, made in France, was sent to New York. Also in this year, astronomers reported seeing a large moon-like object in the inner solar system near Venus. This was 154 years after 1732, when people watched fiery globes cross the sky over Swabia, which preceded an earthquake on May 28th. Counting 154 years after 1886 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. The landmark monument, the Statue of Liberty, is destroyed. A large celestial body enters the inner solar system, and strange things are seen burning in the upper atmosphere, moments before earthquakes occur. The year 1890, as we just reviewed, was visited with hail and pebbles raining on France in June, and blood falling from the skies in May, with a comet-like object in October passing 100 degrees of the sky at an incredible velocity. But 1890 is also an isometric epicenter for a different projection involving 2040. It was 150 years after 1740 when telescope maker and astronomer James Short discovered a planet-sized object passing through the inner solar system near Venus. Also, in 1740, the predictions of Mother Shipton were published widely for the first time in Tyrrell's The Yorkshire Prophecy. Counting 150 years after 1890 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. A large celestial body will enter the inner solar system in 2040, bringing hail, rocks, and blood to fall upon the Earth, fulfilling the predictions of the Northern Prophetess concerning the destruction of Earth by the Sky Dragon. In 1862, black spots were reported to be passing, and a comet appeared having a very nebulous tail. This was 178 years after 1684, when astronomers reported the appearance of a comet in May. Counting 178 years after 1862 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, a comet-like object will enter the inner solar system with a spectacular tail. In May, a strewn field of asteroids and glacial masses pass between Earth and the Sun. In 1846, a comet named Biela was seen to have fragmented by astronomers. Another comet appears and is named Bronson, with astronomers asserting that it does not orbit the Sun, but some other unknown body. In this same year, astronomers discover planet Neptune at the outer edge of the solar system, initially found by German astronomer Gale. This was 194 years after 1652, when astronomers in Europe reported the appearance of a new comet in November, after a burning meteorite crashed between Siena and Rome in May. Counting 194 years after 1846 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. Comets enter the inner solar system but orbit a gigantic planetary body that is reported by astronomers at the edge of the solar system. Planet Phoenix is seen, and Italy or southern Europe suffers meteoric rain in May. Readers of When the Sun Darkens will recall that when Phoenix passed through the inner solar system in 1902, it brought with it a formerly unknown comet that was named Morehouse. In 1908, a bright flash illuminated the sky over Asia, and a comet-like body exploded in the air above Tunguska, Siberia. The blast splintered forests for hundreds of miles like matchsticks and knocked people off their feet even 100 miles away. The pressure of the blast affected barometers in England, and sunset for weeks were spectacular due to cosmic dust. This occurred in June. Later in the year, an earthquake at Messina, Sicily, was followed by a tsunami that killed 120,000 people. On July 2nd, over Braemar, thunder was heard high in the sky on a clear day with the sun shining, followed by pieces of ice that fell from the sky. This was 132 years after 1776, when the North American 13 colonies declared their independence from England, the beginning of the mighty United States of America. In May of 1776, an order of globalists was founded called the Illuminati, agents of foreign powers that sought to control and destroy the free republics and democracies emerging throughout Europe and North America. Counting 132 years after 1908 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, the areas of Asia will suffer cosmic impacts and atmospheric detonations of extraterrestrial materials, as cosmic dust and debris envelop Earth. The Mediterranean Sea suffers seismic activity that causes tidal waves to destroy entire cities with massive loss of life. Glacial fragments enter the atmosphere and rain in pieces. The enemies of the United States will exult over the ruin of the once mighty empire. In 1808, many people in North America watched in stunned fascination as a long procession of meteors passed overhead for 2 hours on May 16th. Some were even seen to fall to Earth, and when the areas were searched, the people discovered a strange gelatinous substance on the ground. This was 231.5 years after 1577, when a bright comet was viewed from Europe and North America. In December, many black objects passing through the sky were seen from Wittenberg, Germany, counting 231.5 years after May of 1808 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, celestial objects in space will be viewed from the northern hemisphere in May, which supports the fact that Phoenix, on its descending node from north of the ecliptic, would be best seen north of the equator. In 1202 AD, at the height of a famine in Egypt that had already caused widespread starvation, a series of earthquakes began on May 20th. Ships out at harbor in the Mediterranean were pulled away from the coast and never seen again. This was 837.5 years after 365 AD, when in July, an earthquake shook Alexandria and northern Egypt. Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote that the quake was preceded by lightning and thunder in the sky that continued through the quaking. The Mediterranean coast withdrew as the sea disappeared northward, exposing the seabed to air. Thousands of people ran out picking up fish and shells, but a sudden tidal wave returned, overtaking these unfortunate people. The tsunami flooded Alexandria and even deposited ships atop buildings. When the water receded, many more people were pulled out to sea to die. About 50,000 people lost their lives. Marcellianus wrote that the disaster affected the whole Mediterranean world, Aegean islands and coasts where whole ships and their dead crews could be found near Mothone in the Peloponnesus. Counting 837.5 years after May of 1202 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, terrible seismic activity in the Mediterranean world will destroy islands and coastal cities as the Mediterranean Sea overextends its boundaries to the ruin of property and lives north and south of the basin. In 1914, a typhus epidemic killed millions of people from Europe to Russia. World War I began, involving both European powers and Russia, and on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the British suffered 57,470 casualties against the Germans, 19,240 of them being killed in combat. The Japanese volcano Sakurajima erupted, burying many buildings. This was 126 years after 1788, when the astronomer Schroeder witnessed lights appearing on the surface of the moon in the lunar mountains. When sunlight touched that same region, there was a shadow cast where the lights had been seen, which indicated that these lights were lunar volcanoes. In New York, the first federal Congress was held. Counting 126 years after 1914 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, a world war will erupt in the northern hemisphere of Eurasia, as well as a tragic epidemic as volcanic activity occurs in the Pacific. Volcanic activity will occur on the moon as well. The final time Congress will meet in New York is in this year. In 1853, the city of New York hosted the first World's Fair held in the United States. Remember, it was the first World's Fair ever that was hosted in England inside the Crystal Palace, predicted by Mother Shipton. This was 187 years after 1666 AD, the infamous year when the Great Fire of London destroyed the city. London was the New York of Europe. Incidentally, as is so commonly shown in many books on Nostradamus, the fiery destruction of London was predicted by the French seer. Counting 187 years after 1853 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. New York City is destroyed and ceases to be the front line of global industry. Economics, Wall Street, and politics, United Nations base. London in southern Britain is also destroyed, just as Nostradamus infers in his quatrains. In 1880, the ancient Egyptian obelisk of Thutmose is set up in Central Park, New York, a monument originally quarried, moved, and erected by the Israelites subservient to Pharaoh in 1515 BC. Also in 1880, a series of genocidal programs in Russia prompted millions of people to migrate, the majority Jews fleeing the persecution, with hundreds of thousands escaping across the Atlantic to enter the United States through the immigration offices of New York City. This is 160 years after 1720, when people in New York and throughout the Northern Hemisphere observed a bright comet named Nexel. Counting 160 years after 1880 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. The obelisk in Central Park will be toppled, a monument that will then be 3,554 years old. Great masses of people will flee New York, and a new celestial body will be clearly seen in the heavens. In 1916, over 1 million casualties were documented in the Second Battle of Somme during World War I between France and Germany. But those soldiers lost in this one battle were only a fraction of the total death toll France suffered during this tragic war. This was 124 years after 1792, the year of the founding of the French Revolution. Counting 124 years after 1916 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040 will come an end to the French government and millions of French people will die. In 1915, Professor Barnard studied the strange region in space around the constellation Cephus in the northern circumpolar sphere. At that location in space, he discovered a vast blackness, an object near the star Algol, the Ghoul, which was considered by the ancients to be the most evil of all stars. This was 125 years after 1790, when the Spanish excavated the mysterious Aztec stone of the fifth sun, which depicts the 4 ages of the sun, or phoenix transits, and predicts the fifth sun dying, return of the phoenix. The relic, known also as the Aztec calendar stone, is a virtual Mesoamerican version of the apocalypse. Counting 125 years after 1915 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. A celestial object will descend out of the northern circumpolar region of space, north of the ecliptic, and bring with it the anciently understood and predicted apocalypse. Professor Barnard was an avid astronomer. His 1915 discovery was not his first glimpse of the heavens relative to this book. 23 years earlier, in 1892, Barnard, using a 36-inch Lick refractor telescope, discovered a planet beyond Neptune that could not have been Pluto, as Pluto is so small that even the Hubble Space Telescope can only return blurred images of it. The scientific community met his astonishing discovery with silence, and the discovery was not made known to the public until the 1906 August edition of Nature. He got a one-time glimpse of Phoenix, approaching exactly 10 years before it would pass through the inner solar system in its descending node out of the northern sky. Astronomers could not verify Barnard's discovery because of their obstinate position that a planet had to be located along the ecliptic plane, refusing that planetary-sized objects could mimic cometary orbits. Also, in 1892 in April, the Dutch astronomer Mueller watched dark objects float between Earth and the Moon. Remarkably, in The Complete Story of the San Francisco Horror, published in 1906, we find, on page 234, that in April of 1892, a severe earthquake rocked San Francisco, followed by another 2 days later. This was 148 years after 1744, when the entire northern hemisphere populations from North America to Europe were terrified by the appearance of the Great Daytime Comet, which had 7 tails and caused much apocalyptic fever. Astronomers named it Comet de Chasseau. Counting 148 years after 1892 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, early in the year, professional and probably amateur astronomers will view planet Phoenix at the edge of the solar system far above the ecliptic and report their findings to various agencies and world governments. These reports will be ignored, and the private sector will not be notified. The object will come into view and terrify the inhabitants of the world. Recall that by all ancient and prophetic accounts, Phoenix appears for 7 days. In 1968, astronomers at Harvard University at their observatory discovered a large asteroid, and trajectoral analysis determined that it was on a collision course with Earth. The asteroid was several miles across, and if impact occurred, it would be globally catastrophic. The object had initially been seen in 1967, but the astronomers predicted impact in 1968, during the month of June. The discovery was made known to government officials, but never brought to the public's attention. It was watched carefully and missed the Earth by only 1 million miles, this being a very short distance in astronomical space. The Sun is 93 million miles away. This was 36 years before 2004, when astronomers discovered another near-Earth asteroid, naming it Apophis. Counting 36 years after 2004 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, a large object will be seen approaching the Earth. Though it will be reported to the authorities will not relay the information to the public. On June 15, 1896, a submarine earthquake in the Tuscarora Deep, south of Japan, caused the Pacific Sea to recede, leaving behind drying ocean bed with stranded sea creatures. Multitudes of Japanese went out and gathered the animals up for food, but were overtaken as a 90-foot-high wave returned at 450 miles per hour and slammed into the coast, flooding far inland and washing whole villages out to sea. Over 30,000 people were lost at sea and died. This disaster very closely mirrors what happened to Alexandria, Egypt in 365 AD. Also, in 1896, A.P. Sennett, in The Growth of the Soul, wrote that there exist two more planets in our solar system beyond Neptune. This would be Phoenix and Nibiru. This was 144 years after 1752, when on April 15th, over Norway, facing circumpolar heavens, the people witnessed a strange, star-like object of octagonal shape pass over the sky. And over Augermanland were seen balls of fire streaking across the sky. Counting 144 years after 1896 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, seismic activity in the Pacific will result in tidal waves and widespread loss of life among Asian people. Though the billions living on Earth before the cataclysm are largely unaware of the approaching doom, there will be many who are informed, people who read about or were told about this global catastrophe was coming. The sky will show a stunning celestial object unlike any seen in modern history, appearing in the northern heavens. In 1811, the New Madrid earthquakes rocked the eastern United States in a series of the most widespread and powerful quakes on record. The quakes were experienced from New York to Florida, causing church bells to toll in Virginia as bell towers were shook. Centered in Missouri, the quakes happened in late 1811 after the appearance of the Great Comet. At one point, the Mississippi River was observed to flow backwards, and in Kentucky, the renowned naturalist John James Audubon, among others, heard a roaring in the sky and thought it was a tornado. They observed a darkening of the sky, albeit unusual, that later brightened back to normal. This was 229 years after 1582, when a comet appeared and brought a terrible plague upon Thuringia and the Netherlands. Counting 229 years after 1811 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. During a darkening of the sky in 2040, terrible earthquakes will occur from Missouri to New York, Virginia and Florida, and the coastal regions of the North Atlantic. An object approaching Earth will be seen by Europeans and a deadly epidemic will begin. It would seem that when isometric projections span several centuries, their likelihood should become less probable since, with the extension of time between events, there would be found fewer and fewer parallels. But this is not the case. The reason is because time and events are positioned within a three-dimensional structure. A fourth dimension can never be static because everything continues to move. Isometric projections demonstrate the fixed geometrical parameters of this fourth-dimensional universe that we, as individuals, flow through in a backdrop of multitudes of pasts. In 1797, at Quito, Ecuador, an earthquake killed 41,000 people. This was 243 years after 1554 AD, when the prophecies of Nostradamus were finished and edited by the secretary of the French seer named Jean-Aime de Chauvenet. Of course, these centuries predicted and dated the 2040 AD cataclysm and encoded the name Phoenix as well as its 138-year orbit. Counting 243 years after 1797 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. Seismic activity in the Central American and North-South American regions will result in high death tolls. Planet Phoenix will cause global destruction, fulfilling many prophecies. In 1677, Europeans witnessed a comet appearance in April. This was 363 years after 1314 AD, when planet Nibiru passed through the inner system and darkened the sun over Asia, causing storms, meteoric rain, quakes, flooding, and plague fogs. Europe gazed in horror at the night sky, as a great blackness darkened the stars. This event is well documented in Anunnaki homeworld. Counting 363 years after 1677 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. This unique pattern has Nibiru as the far past and Phoenix at the future end of the projection, with the appearance of the comet as the isometric epicenter. Obviously, in 2040 AD, a hitherto scientifically unrecognized intruder planet will approach the inner system, pass close to Earth, and be the cause of worldwide geological changes and epic disasters. In 1303 AD, during a short period known to historians as the Seven Comets over Europe, 1298 through 1314 AD, an earthquake afflicted Egypt, some believing that it toppled the remains of the famous Pharos lighthouse. This was 737 years after 566 AD, when brilliant lights appeared in the skies, and, according to Gregory of Tours, the heavens appeared to be on fire. Counting 737 years after 1303 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040 AD, just after a period of heightened comet activity, an earthquake will rock the southern Mediterranean and Egypt, as objects entering the upper atmosphere brighten the skies over Europe. In 1290, an earthquake at Chihili, China, killed 100,000 people. This was 750 years after 540 AD, when a total eclipse of the sun occurred that did not involve the moon. Something else transited between Earth and the sun, casting at least the British Isles in shadow. This is recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Also, in 540 AD, the bubonic plague, killing thousands daily, overspread from the east and spilled into Roman provincial territories and the Roman domains of Justinian. Counting 750 years after 1290 is 2040. Isometric projection interpretation. In 2040, a celestial body will pass between the Earth and the Sun and cast the world in shadows as earthquakes and plague kill countless multitudes in the east. Ruin, disease, and death will spread across the world from the east toward the west. Our final example of isometric patterns involving 2040 concerns again the year 1902, the last time Phoenix passed through the inner system on its 138-year orbital journey before returning in 2040. The year 1971 is our calendrical epicenter, being 69 years after 1902 and 69 years before 2040. In 1971, the CIA was deeply entrenched in the jungles of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War in an intelligence operation referred to by the Vietnamese as Phong Hoang, but the U.S. government called it Project Phoenix. This operation was a joint effort between Vietnamese and Americans, and the intelligence gathered resulted in the deaths of untold thousands. The critic will hurry and call this coincidence, but the astute student of history, seeing through the lens of isometric projections, will know that the coincidences are merely the reemergence of past space-time reflections. We conclude this chapter on 2040 with a quote from Thomas Troward from the year 1902. A relation once clearly grasped in its mathematical aspect becomes thenceforth one of the unalterable truths of the universe. No longer a thing to be argued about, but an axiom that may be assumed as the foundation on which to build up the edifice of further knowledge.